I never expected that a weekend away would dismantle the life I had so carefully constructed. My life was a structure of quiet order, a fortress of solitude built from neat routines and predictable days. I was a graphic designer, a profession that suited my temperament perfectly. I could create entire worlds on a screen, arranging pixels into perfect harmony, all from the safety of my own apartment. It was a life of clean lines and controlled spaces, both on my monitor and in my heart. The only variable, the one chaotic and beautiful element I could never fully account for, was Julian. Julian was my best friend and my roommate. He was an architect, a man who built real things, tangible structures of wood and steel and glass. He was my opposite in almost every way. Where I was contained, he was expansive. Where I was quiet, his presence filled a room without him needing to say a word. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the world with an effortless grace. His voice was a low, steady rumble that could soothe the frayed edges of my anxiety just by asking if I wanted coffee. He moved with a grounded certainty that I, in my constant state of internal flux, found both mesmerizing and deeply intimidating. He was, in my mind, a work of art in a museum I was not allowed to touch. I had committed every detail of him to memory, cataloging the small things that made him Julian. The way he'd run a hand through his dark, thick hair when he was concentrating on a blueprint. The faint, clean scent of his soap that lingered in the hallway after his morning shower, a smell like fresh rain and moss. The network of fine lines that appeared around his eyes when he gave a genuine, full-throated laugh. I observed him from a distance, even when he was sitting 3 feet away on our shared sofa. The space between us was a chasm I had dug myself, a trench of unspoken feelings and crippling fear. The barrier, the great immutable wall between us, was my certainty of his straightness. He dated women. He talked about women. He possessed a kind of easy, unassuming masculinity that, to my fearful heart, read as an impenetrable fortress of heterosexuality. To tell him the truth, that my quiet friendship was a flimsy cover for a love so deep it sometimes physically ached, felt like pulling the pin on a grenade in the center of my own life. It would destroy everything. Our friendship, the comfortable domesticity of our apartment, the one stable and good thing I had. So I remained silent, the curator of a secret gallery dedicated to him, a collection of moments and glances and overheard phone calls that I would take out and examine in the lonely quiet of my own room. My admiration was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my days. It was in the way I made sure the coffee was always brewed before he woke up, because I loved the sleepy, grateful smile he'd give me. It was in the way I'd find excuses to be in the living room when he came home from work, just to hear the solid thud of his work boots on the floor and the sigh of relief he'd let out as he dropped his satchel. He was the sun my small, anxious planet orbited, and I was content, or so I told myself, to simply exist in his warmth without ever daring to get closer. The thought of more was a dangerous fantasy, a door in my mind I kept triple-bolted. Then came the idea of the cabin. We should get out of the city for a weekend, he had said one evening, stretching out on the rug and arching his back like a contented cat. Just us. Fresh air, no deadlines. The words "just us" sent a terrified, exhilarating jolt through my system. I agreed, of course. To say no would have required an explanation I didn't have. So I nodded, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and pretended it was the most casual idea in the world. But inside, the carefully constructed walls of my fortress began to show cracks. A weekend alone with him. It was a fantasy and a nightmare, a trial by fire for my carefully guarded heart. I knew, with a grim sense of foreboding, that my quiet, orderly world was about to be thrown into chaos. The drive up to the mountains was filled with a comfortable silence punctuated by Julian's low, rumbling baritone as he sang along to the radio. I watched the city skyline recede in the rearview mirror, feeling as though I were leaving a part of my self-control behind with it. The air grew cooler, cleaner, smelling of pine and damp earth as we climbed higher. I kept my hands clenched in my lap, my knuckles white, a stark contrast to Julian's relaxed grip on the steering wheel. He seemed completely at ease, a man in his element, while I felt like an astronaut stepping out of the airlock without a tether. The cabin was exactly as the pictures had promised, a small, sturdy structure of dark wood nestled in a grove of towering pine trees. It was rustic and cozy, with a stone fireplace, a worn leather sofa, and a single, braided rug on the floor. It was also much, much smaller than I had imagined. The realization that we would be living in each other's pockets for 48 hours landed in my stomach like a stone. There would be no escaping to my room, no closing a door to put a physical barrier between my feelings and his reality. Here, the only barrier was the thinning fabric of my own composure. And then I saw it, off the back deck, partially obscured by steam rising into the cool afternoon air. A hot tub. My mind, ever the catastrophist, immediately supplied a dozen scenarios, each more mortifying than the last. It felt less like an amenity and more like a stage, set for a play I had no idea how to perform. Julian saw it at the same time, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Well, look at that," he said, his voice full of easy pleasure. "Definitely using that later." I just nodded, my throat suddenly dry. The first day passed in a blur of heightened awareness. Every sound was amplified, every movement significant. The scrape of his chair against the wooden floor. The soft thud of his duffel bag as he dropped it in the loft bedroom. The clink of his spoon against his ceramic bowl as he ate chili for lunch. I was a seismograph, and he was the earthquake. I felt his presence not just with my eyes and ears, but as a kind of resonant frequency in the air, a warmth that permeated the small space and made it difficult to breathe. We navigated the cabin with a strange, new awkwardness. In our apartment, we had a rhythm, a dance of domesticity honed over 2 years of living together. Here, the steps were all wrong. We'd reach for the same cabinet handle, our fingers brushing, and I'd pull back as if I'd touched a live wire. He'd pass behind me in the narrow kitchen, his arm grazing my back, and the spot would tingle for minutes afterward. Each accidental touch was a small explosion in the quiet landscape of my interior world. I was raw, exposed, every nerve ending firing at the slightest provocation. Later that evening, we sat on the sofa in front of a crackling fire, a thick wool blanket spread over both our laps. A storm had rolled in, and the sound of rain drumming on the roof created a cocoon of intimacy that was both comforting and terrifying. We were watching some mindless action movie, but I couldn't have told you the plot. My entire focus was on the 6 inches of space between his thigh and mine under the blanket, a gulf that felt both impossibly vast and dangerously small. I could feel the heat radiating from him, a steady, solid warmth that beckoned to the cold, lonely corners of my soul. I imagined leaning my head on his shoulder, just for a second, and the longing was so sharp, so painful, it felt like a physical wound. He broke the silence, his voice a low murmur that barely rose above the sound of the fire and the rain. "You know," he began, his eyes still on the screen, "Chloe and I broke up." I turned to look at him, surprised. He hadn't mentioned it. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Are you okay?" He shrugged, a heavy, tired movement of his broad shoulders. "Yeah, I am. It wasn't right." He finally turned his head, his gaze meeting mine in the flickering firelight. "It never really feels right, you know? It always feels like I'm performing, like I'm reading from a script someone else wrote." There it was, a crack in the facade, a glimpse of the man behind the confident exterior, a hint of a vulnerability I had never seen before. He wasn't just the steady, unshakable force I had built him up to be in my mind. He was searching for something. He was lonely, too. The realization didn't lessen my admiration. It deepened it, transforming it from a worship of an idol into a profound, aching affection for a person. He looked away, back at the fire, a thoughtful frown on his face. "I just feel like there's something missing, something I'm supposed to understand that I just don't." My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to say something, to offer some piece of myself in return for this unexpected offering of his. But the words were trapped behind the wall of my fear. What could I possibly say? So I just sat there, in the warm, firelit silence, the weight of his confession settling between us, changing the very air we breathed. The distance between us under the blanket no longer felt like a chasm. It felt like an invitation I was still too terrified to accept. The next day, the rain had cleared, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet earth and pine. The tension from the night before had dissipated, replaced by a fragile, tentative ease. We hiked a trail behind the cabin, our boots sinking into the soft mud. We walked mostly in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. It felt less like an absence of words and more like a shared space, a quiet understanding. My anxiety hadn't vanished, but it had receded, like a tide going out, leaving behind a strange and unfamiliar calm. That evening, after dinner, Julian stood up and stretched. "Hot tub time," he announced, his voice casual, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Hesitation, maybe, or anticipation. My own heart began its familiar, frantic beat. This was it. The stage was set. I told myself it would be fine. We were just two friends, relaxing. There was nothing inherently intimate about it. But my body betrayed me. My hands shook as I pulled on my swim trunks in the bathroom. My reflection in the mirror looked pale and wide-eyed, a man walking toward his own execution. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me, and stepped out onto the deck. The night air was cold, raising goosebumps on my skin. Julian was already in the tub, leaning back against the side, his eyes closed. Steam billowed around him, obscuring his face for a moment before drifting away on the slight breeze. The only sounds were the gentle hum of the motor and the chirping of crickets in the darkness. He looked like some ancient statue half submerged in a mystical spring, all sculpted lines of his shoulders and chest visible above the churning water. My throat was tight. I lowered myself into the water, the heat a shocking and immediate relief against my cold skin. I settled on the opposite side, putting as much distance between us as possible. The churning water was a physical and metaphorical buffer. I could hide in the steam and the noise. Julian opened his eyes and gave me a small, quiet smile. "Good, right?" "Yeah," I managed to croak out, my voice sounding strained. "It's perfect." We sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't the comfortable silence of the hike, or the charged silence of the night before. This was something else entirely. It was a waiting silence. The air was thick with unspoken things, with the weight of his confession and my years of hidden feelings. I focused on the sensation of the water jets against my back, on the pinpricks of stars visible through the canopy of pine trees, on anything but the man sitting across from me. He was the one who finally spoke. "Leo," he said, his voice soft, almost lost in the hum of the tub. I looked up. His face was serious, his gaze intense. "The things I said last night, about feeling like something's missing." "Yeah," I whispered. He hesitated, searching for the words. I think I know what it is." My heart stopped. This was it. The grenade pin was being pulled. I braced myself for the explosion, for the fallout that would inevitably follow. I prepared for him to talk about Chloe, or some other woman, to articulate his romantic frustrations in a way that would definitively, finally, and forever cement the wall between us. But he didn't say anything else. Instead, he moved. He pushed himself up, water cascading from his shoulders and chest, and for a horrifying second, I thought he was just getting out. I felt a strange mix of profound relief and crushing disappointment. But he didn't climb out of the tub. He took one step through the churning water, then another. He stopped directly in front of me, the steam swirling around his waist. He was so close I could see the individual droplets of water clinging to his eyelashes. And then, in a movement that felt both impossibly slow and shockingly fast, he lowered himself down. My brain couldn't process what was happening until it happened. He sat on my lap, facing me. His solid weight settled against me, his legs bracketing mine. The water sloshed around us, the only sound in a world that had suddenly gone completely silent. My entire system short-circuited. It was a total sensory overload. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could register was the reality of him. The heat of his skin, slick with water, against my chest. The solid, heavy presence of his thighs pressing against mine. His hands came to rest on my shoulders, his grip surprisingly light, almost questioning. My own hands were frozen in the water at my sides, useless anchors in a sea of overwhelming sensation. I stared at him, my eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a desire so potent it threatened to swallow me whole. He was watching my face, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the cabin. Was this a joke? A drunken, monumental miscalculation? My mind scrambled for a rational explanation, for any life raft to cling to in this sudden, terrifying ocean of intimacy. But there was none. There was only Julian, on my lap, in a hot tub, under the stars, looking at me as if he were seeing me for the very first time. His gaze dropped to my mouth. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each second lasting an eternity. He leaned in, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stop him, to shatter the moment. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, caught in the tractor beam of his proximity, of this impossible, dreamlike reality. When his lips finally met mine, it wasn't a hard, demanding kiss. It was soft, tentative, a question. For a moment, I was too shocked to respond. Then, something inside me, some deeply buried instinct, broke through the panic. I kissed him back. My hands, finally remembering how to function, came up out of the water and rested hesitantly on his waist. I could feel the hard muscle there, the warmth of his skin. The kiss deepened, and the last of my carefully constructed walls crumbled into dust. The world fell away. There was only the heat of the water, the cool night air on my face, and the impossible, undeniable reality of Julian's mouth on mine. I don't know how long it lasted. Seconds, minutes, a lifetime. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. I could feel the frantic thrum of his heart against my chest, a rhythm that matched my own. The silence returned, but it was a new kind of silence now. It was filled not with tension, but with the deafening roar of what had just happened. Neither of us spoke. We just stayed there, wrapped in the steam and the silence and the shocking, terrifying, beautiful aftermath of a boundary being crossed. The point of no return. My orderly life was over. And in its place, something new and unknown was just beginning. The walk back into the cabin was a silent, dreamlike procession. We dried off without looking at each other, the air thick with the unspoken gravity of what had happened. We had shattered the foundation of our friendship, and neither of us knew what was going to be built in its place. He went up to the loft, and I retreated to the small bedroom downstairs. I lay in bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of replayed moments and frantic questions. My lips still tingled from the kiss. My body still hummed with the memory of his weight, his warmth. It had felt more real than anything I had ever experienced, and yet, as the minutes ticked by in the suffocating quiet, it began to feel like a hallucination. The morning was a special kind of hell. The easy domesticity of our life together had evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating awkwardness. I woke up early, my mind already churning with anxiety. I could hear him moving around upstairs, the familiar creak of the floorboards now sounding like accusations. I stayed in bed, feigning sleep, until I heard him go outside. Only then did I emerge, my heart pounding in nervous rhythm. The cabin, which had felt so cozy and intimate the day before, now felt like a cage. The air was charged with everything we weren't saying. I made coffee, my movements stiff and robotic. When he came back inside, his face was a blank mask. He didn't meet my eyes. He just mumbled a morning and grabbed a mug. We drank our coffee on opposite ends of the small kitchen, the silence between us a physical entity, a third person in the room. My anxiety spiral began in earnest. My brain, a cruel and efficient prosecutor, began laying out the case against me. It was a mistake. He was emotional after the breakup. He'd had a couple of beers. He regrets it. The most damning piece of evidence was his behavior now. He was distant, withdrawn. He was acting like a man who had made a terrible error in judgment and was now desperately trying to pretend it never happened. He wasn't just avoiding my gaze. He was avoiding my very existence. The emotional chasm between us felt wider and more impassable than ever before. I was convinced I had ruined everything. Our friendship, the one constant in my life, was now a casualty of a single, impulsive moment in a hot tub. I had misread everything. His vulnerability, his confession of feeling lost. I had twisted it to fit my own desperate narrative. He had been reaching out for a friend, and I had what? Taken advantage of it? Responded in a way that had horrified him? The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I started mentally composing an apology, a pathetic, groveling speech that would somehow try to piece our friendship back together, even though I knew it was shattered beyond repair. I imagined myself moving out, finding a new apartment, the future stretching out before me as a bleak, Julian-less landscape. We packed in near silence, the only sounds the zip of bags and the thud of objects being placed on the table. Every quiet moment was an affirmation of my fears. His silence wasn't contemplative, it was disgusted. His distance wasn't awkwardness, it was repulsion. I felt sick to my stomach. I just wanted to get in the car and drive, to put this entire disastrous weekend behind me, even if it meant driving away from the most important person in my life forever. We were doing a final sweep of the cabin, making sure we hadn't left anything behind. I was in the kitchen, wiping down a counter that was already clean, just to have something to do with my hands. He was standing by the door, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I could feel his eyes on me, but I refused to look up. I couldn't bear to see the pity or regret in his face. Leo, his voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a knife. I froze, my hand hovering over the countertop. This was it. The verdict. I braced myself for the words that would officially end our friendship. I'm sorry. Or, let's just forget last night ever happened. I finally forced myself to turn and face him. He looked nervous. His usual easy confidence was gone, replaced by a raw uncertainty. He wasn't looking at me with disgust. He was looking at me with something that looked terrifyingly like fear. We need to talk about last night, he said, the words coming out in a rush. My heart plummeted into my stomach. Julian, I am so sorry. I started, the apology I'd been rehearsing spilling out of me. I don't know what I was thinking. I completely misread everything, and I never should have. Stop, he interrupted, taking a step closer. Leo, stop. You didn't misread anything. I stared at him, confused. My brain struggled to catch up. What? He ran a hand through his hair, the familiar gesture now looking fraught with anxiety. I'm the one who should be sorry. For being a coward. For putting you in that position. He took another step, closing half the distance between us. Last night, that wasn't a mistake. Not for me. The room tilted slightly. The narrative I had so carefully constructed in my head, the one where I was the villain who had ruined everything, began to crumble. I don't understand, I whispered. I thought. You're straight. It came out as a statement, the foundational belief upon which I had built my entire relationship with him. A sad, wry smile touched his lips. Yeah, I thought so too. Or I tried to. He looked down at the floor, then back up at me, his eyes searching mine. I told you it never felt right with anyone else. That it felt like I was reading from a script. It's because I was. The script said I was supposed to fall for a girl, get married, build a life. But the feelings were never there. Not really. He paused, taking a deep, shaky breath. The feelings were here. With you. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. It was impossible. It was everything I had ever wanted to hear. My mind refused to accept it, still clinging to the safety of my long-held assumptions. For a long time, he continued, his voice dropping lower, more earnest. I didn't understand it. I just knew I was happier when you were around. I knew that the best part of my day was coming home and hearing you typing in your room. I told myself it was just friendship. A really good friendship. He let out a short, humorless laugh. But friends don't lie awake at night thinking about what it would be like to kiss their roommate. Friends don't break up with their girlfriend because they realize they're more in love with the person they live with. He was talking about Chloe. The breakup wasn't just about a vague sense of dissatisfaction. It was about me. The revelation was so profound, so earth-shattering, that I felt dizzy. I've been so confused, Leo, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And so scared. Scared of what it meant. Scared of losing you if I was wrong. Last night, sitting in that hot tub, I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sit 3 feet away from you and pretend I wasn't completely in love with you. The words hung in the air between us. In love with you. He had said it. He had taken the most secret, deeply buried desire of my heart and spoken it out loud. The floodgates broke. All the years of pent-up longing, of carefully managed hope and despair, came rushing to the surface. I love you too, I whispered, the words feeling foreign and yet perfectly natural on my tongue. I have for years. I never thought. I know, he said, a look of profound relief washing over his face. I made sure you wouldn't. He closed the remaining distance between us. He cupped my face in his hands, his palms warm and slightly rough against my skin. He looked into my eyes, and for the first time, I saw everything clearly. Not the confident, unattainable friend from my fantasies, but Julian. Real, and vulnerable, and here. He kissed me again. And this kiss was nothing like the tentative, questioning one in the hot tub. This was a kiss of certainty, of relief. It was deep and sure and full of all the words we had been unable to say for years. It was the feeling of a key turning in a lock I never knew I was trapped behind. It wasn't a shattering or an explosion. It was a homecoming. It was the end of my quiet, orderly, lonely life. It was the beginning of everything else. The drive home was quiet, but it was a universe away from the tense, awkward silence of the morning. It was a peaceful quiet, a settled quiet. Julian drove with one hand on the wheel, the other holding mine, his thumb stroking lazy circles over my knuckles. Every so often, I would glance over at him, at his strong profile silhouetted against the passing scenery, and a wave of disbelief and pure, unadulterated joy would wash over me. It felt fragile, this new reality, like a soap bubble I was afraid to touch for fear of it popping. But the solid, warm pressure of his hand in mine was an anchor, keeping me grounded in the truth of the moment. When we got back to our apartment, the space felt different. It was the same furniture, the same layout, the same faint scent of coffee and old books. But the energy had shifted. The invisible wall that had always stood between us, the one I had so painstakingly maintained, was gone. The apartment no longer felt like my fortress of solitude with a welcome guest. It felt like our home. We unpacked in a comfortable, synchronized rhythm, moving around each other with a new, easy grace. There were no more accidental brushes. Touches were now intentional. A hand on the small of my back as I passed, a brief squeeze of my shoulder. Each one was a small affirmation, a quiet confirmation that the dream was real. That night, we ordered takeout and ate it sitting on the floor of the living room, our backs against the sofa. We talked for hours, not about the big, earth-shattering revelations of the day, but about small things. Childhood memories, stupid jokes, our hopes for the future. It was a process of rediscovery, of learning the person you thought you knew best all over again through this new, incredible lens. I saw the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, not as a curator observing a piece of art, but as a participant in his joy. I heard the low rumble of his voice, not as a sound to be cataloged, but as the soundtrack to the start of my new life. Later, as we were cleaning up, he cornered me in the kitchen, trapping me gently between his body and the counter. He leaned in, his expression a mixture of affection and gentle mischief. "So," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that I felt through my entire body. "Next time we plan a weekend away, maybe we book a cabin with a slightly less dramatic hot tub." I laughed, a real, uninhibited laugh that felt like it came from a place deep inside me that had been dormant for years. "Or," I countered, looping my arms around his neck and pulling him closer, "maybe we just try the couch first. It seems far more efficient." He grinned, that slow, beautiful grin that I had admired from afar for so long, and kissed me. It was a simple kiss, soft and sweet, but it was filled with the promise of 1,000 more just like it. It was a kiss that said, "This is real, this is ours." That night, for the first time, I didn't sleep in my own bed. I slept in his. I lay on my side, watching him sleep in the dim light filtering through the window. His face, so often a mask of calm composure, was completely relaxed, his breathing a deep and steady rhythm. The architect, the builder, was at rest. I reached out a hesitant hand and gently traced the line of his jaw. He didn't stir. Lying there, in the quiet intimacy of his room, I thought about the walls I had built around myself. Walls of routine, of observation, of fear. I had believed they were keeping me safe, protecting me from the pain of rejection. But I saw now that they had only been keeping me isolated, a prisoner in a fortress of my own design. I had lived my life as a spectator, watching my own desires from a safe distance, convinced that was the only way to survive. Julian hadn't just knocked down my walls. He had been brave enough to show me the cracks in his own. He had risked everything, our friendship, his own sense of self, on the terrifying, beautiful hope of connection. He had stepped out of the water and into the unknown, and in doing so, he had given me the courage to do the same. The fear wasn't entirely gone. It lingered at the edges, a faint whisper of doubt that this was all too good to be true. But for the first time, it was overshadowed by something far more powerful: hope. A quiet, steady, and profound hope. The kind of hope that felt less like a fleeting wish and more like a foundation being laid, stone by solid stone. I shifted closer, resting my head on his chest, right over his heart. I could feel its slow, strong beat against my ear, a steady and reassuring drum. It was the sound of my new reality. The loneliness that had been my constant companion for so long was gone, replaced by this incredible warmth, this solid presence beside me in the dark. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm of his heart, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. I felt like I was finally home,